Hi, I am doing my presentation on suicide within the prison systems and the relation that mental health has towards it. I did put together a PowerPoint. However, you won't be able to see it. So you'll just be focusing on me, but I will be reading some of the information about the cases that I chose. So let's get started. Starting off with the case of Janika Edmond, who was an inmate at the Huron Valley, I think it's Huron Valley Correctional Facility here in Michigan. And her story begins by explaining that she was transferred from the Lenawee County Jail to the Huron Valley Women's Correctional Facility in February of 2013. She had a history of multiple suicide attempts following that, and her medical history had shown previous diagnoses of a major depressive and mood disorder, which it does require medication to treat. So that is something that she was on while she was at the facility. It said in the article that the Michigan Department of Corrections had issued a health management plan for her, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a plan to help manage her mental health, to kind of make things at the end of the day easier. So baby steps and goals to get her to where she wants to be mentally and emotionally. And with this plan, the guards were required to report any behavior or verbalization of harm to herself or others, as well as any refusal to take her medication. And on November 2nd of 2015, Janika was placed into a shower module by the officer who was in charge of monitoring her at that time, and this was Diana Callahan. The guard did not remove Janika's clothing, which it said in the article she did not remove her clothing despite the fact that Janika had had previous suicide attempts in the shower before using a towel or cloth-like material. It then went on to explain that choking sounds could be audibly heard coming from this shower module for 4 minutes. And nobody had gone in to check on her for 20 minutes. The initial attempts to save her life were successful. However, she was pronounced brain dead a couple of days later and pulled off of life support. Prior to this, Janika had requested from the guards a suicide prevention vest and insisted to them that she was of harm to herself, that she wanted to commit suicide, and the guards ignored her request and instead made fun of her for becoming suicidal. Again, they actually placed a bet on her over lunch that she would become suicidal again. So that's extremely sad that that happened like that. I included a little slide in here that says what could have been done differently in this situation. I believe that given her previous suicide attempts in the shower, that her clothing definitely should have been removed before she was put into the shower module. She also, as I mentioned before, she had requested a suicide prevention vest, which should have been given to her immediately. I remember reading in one of the articles that in cases like this with inmates who are suicidal and have these mental health issues, that they should be treated like extremely urgently and promptly, and if something like this is requested, then they are what's the correct word? They are entitled to have that. And the guard should have never left her unattended for 20 minutes. In her case, she shouldn't have been left alone at all. She should have been monitored the entire time, and she was not. And then the last thing was that the choking sounds were audibly heard from the showers for 4 minutes straight, and that should have definitely been immediately checked on. because I do believe that it would have changed the overall outcome. Just these small things that really were not taken into account in the beginning that should have been, that have to do with our mental health, just these small things that some people don't think about sometimes. So I took a little quote here from the article from the lawsuit, and it says that the Michigan Department of Corrections had failed to follow policy by not immediately informing the Michigan State Police of Edmund's death, as well as the MSP officials had to obtain a search warrant to gather evidence to conduct further investigation. Furthermore, into the lawsuit side of it, both of the guards who were joking about her becoming suicide again, which was Callahan and Moore, they were first suspended of their positions and then later terminated in March of 2016. Moore was reinstated, however, she did have to go through arbitration first, and she was reinstated after arbitration. However, somewhere along the line, she decided to later resign from the position. Callahan was criminally charged and pleaded no contest to involuntary manslaughter. She was sentenced in December of 2018, 6 months in jail, as well as 2 years of probation. And then after all of this happened, the estate of Janika Edmonds had filed a wrongful death lawsuit in 2017, which was settled in May of 2019. The Michigan Department of Corrections had settled for $860,000, which part of that went towards fees for lawyers, and then the other portion of it was split between Janika's two adult siblings. The next case is on another, again, Michigan case. Tatisha Grant, who was an inmate of River Rouge, Michigan. She was arrested by the River Rouge Police Department. This happened on January 1st of 2008. She was found around 2 o'clock in the morning in a bar parking lot, and she was arrested on an outstanding warrant for loitering. It was said in the article that when she was arrested, she was extremely uncooperative. She was resisting the officers arresting her. She was trying to fight back, and later she did attempt to escape. She was found under a police vehicle in the garage, and in order to get her out from underneath the vehicle, they had sprayed her with some kind of chemicals to drive her out from underneath. Afterwards, they hosed her off, stuck her in a cell, and she was put under care of Lieutenant Camila Worthy, who was informed and instructed of exactly how to handle her situation. Per the police policies, Lieutenant Camila Worthy should have been checking on Grant at least once an hour, at least. In this case, it should have, again, been more than once an hour. It was well over an hour before she was checked on. She was in her cell. When they found her hanging from the string of her sweatpants. So she had used that to commit suicide. And I took this quote from the article because it was really descriptive. It describes very well of the situation that happened. And it's a little graphic. So a videotape of Grant's cell shows her banging her head against the cell wall and covering the camera lens with bread from her breakfast tray. When the bread fell off 10 minutes later, it shows her hanging body and eventually records the arrival of the emergency medical responders. An audio tape from the jail's interview room revealed the guards discussing Grant's bizarre behaviors, including self-mutilation by biting chunks out of her arm. However, they had failed to summon medical or psychiatric help for Grant while she lived. An autopsy had revealed that the presence of cocaine was in her body. So definitely with not only her having some underlying mental health issues, but the presence of cocaine in her body as well definitely altered the way she, definitely altered her thinking process and the outcome of her actions. Again, another short little what could we have done differently. So what could the system have done differently for her. Given her aggravated encounter with police and her previous bizarre behavior that was described in the article, I think, again, she should have been closely monitored to the point where she was being monitored 24/7, because she obviously was an extreme danger to herself. The self-mutilation thing is huge. That is a huge thing. And I also threw in here that items, including the drawstring on her sweatpants, she should not have been in possession of that. That should have been removed, along with anything else in her cell that she could have used to cause any harm to herself. And then it also had mentioned that the guards had failed to get her the proper medical and psychiatric care while she was alive. That, you know, again, at the end of the day, plays a big role in the outcome that we have gone over. So, moving more so into the lawsuit side of that case, the Lieutenant Camila Worthy was charged with the misdemeanor of willful neglect of duty. Her lawsuit alleged that her and another officer had committed gross negligence, indifference, and criminal negligence. She was acquitted by a jury, so she was found not guilty of that. However, her estate was represented, Tatisha's estate was represented, and they had requested that the case be reopened and reinvestigated, to which the River Rouge Police Department ended up forking over $1.8 million on that settlement, which was known to be the largest jail suicide settlement in Michigan history. So that is definitely a huge landmark of events right there for the Michigan criminal justice side. And then moving on to my last case here is the case of Scott Mears, or Mayers, I'm not really sure. He was a veteran who was serving time for a home invasion charge. So what happened was he had broken into his neighbor's home to steal prescription medications. He was addicted to prescription medications due to his medication that he was on for PTSD, depression, and chronic pain. Following his stay at the jail, he complained that he was not receiving the adequate medication he needed for his disorders, and he had told multiple inmates that he was planning on killing himself. There was one quote in the article, I don't have it on my slide, but I remember reading it, that it quoted him saying he was going to kill himself as soon as he was able to get his hands on something. I think it was a razor blade. There was a quote in there as well in the article from Julie Hurwitz, who was an attorney for the family, and she had said that the inmates tried to warn the staff members multiple times about the things that they had told them, that he had told them, I should say, and nothing was done about it. So Scott was arrested on August 4th, 2013, and he hung himself just 5 days later in his single man cell. Deputies again had claimed that he had made no cry for help, nor did he show any signs of being suicidal. So what could we have done differently in this case? Again, I think due to his state, his bedding sheets definitely should have been removed from his cell. It seems as though any clothing or cloth-like material has been a popular option as far as things that they are using to assist them in committing suicide. So anything like that can be used to help them out definitely needs to be removed out of their cell. They need to not have access to those things. Due to his state of mind, he also should have been watched and monitored further, I would say, for those suicidal tendencies. So I think that maybe the guards may just not have been catching it in person, or they just didn't want to go by hearsay. Maybe that was the case, I'm not sure. But I definitely think had it been investigated more and had the prisoners who had stepped forward to let these guards know that he was saying these things, I feel like if they would have been further questioned and this had been further investigated, that there would have been a better outcome overall versus what happened. The lawsuit that has to do with Scott was filed by his wife, Vanessa, who she had filed the lawsuit against 3 of the deputies at the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office in Michigan. Again, this was in 2015, and the lawsuit had claimed that Scott had a history of mental health issues, including suicidal ideation, and he had a history of drug addiction as well, as I had mentioned before. He should have been constantly observed by jail staff, but he was not. The lawsuit also claimed deputies should have removed any bedding or other materials that he could have used to harm himself. So again, like I said, that bedding material and the shower, like towel material or any kind of clothing material, is something that should definitely be removed from their possession while they are not being monitored. The trial for Scott had began on September 25th, and the jury had reached a verdict on October 15th, and they found the deputies were not guilty of being responsible for Scott's suicide. Overall, I think that we could definitely make some changes to the system when it comes to mental health and taking it seriously enough so the inmates know that they have that help. I think that's a big reason as to why there's so much self-mutilation, self-harm, suicide, is because their voices are not being heard and their needs are not being met. So I think that inmates with mental health problems, including but not limited to being suicidal, should be constantly monitored by jail and staff personnel at all times so that they don't harm themselves or anybody else. If an inmate with said mental health problems should request help or assistance of any kind, they should get that help immediately. That is something that is a big role in the functionality of their life, I guess you could say. That's something that directly contributes to them and how they react. If an inmate proposes threats of suicide to staff members or other inmates, I think that it should be questioned and investigated immediately, and that goes as far as whoever is involved in what is going on. So in the case of Scott, who had told all these prisoners before that he was planning on killing himself, again, I feel like if that would have been investigated more thoroughly, then the outcome would have been different. And the last thing that I think I've already stressed very heavily on in this presentation is any materials, including, the string from the sweatpants, even that from a shoelace or whatever, anything as small as that, those things need to be removed from their possession, especially when they are not being monitored, because those things are only being used for harm. And if not on them, then unfortunately it could be used on somebody else. So those are all the important things that I think need to be taken into account when we're talking about improving the system. So one last thing that I want to cover, and it's just kind of like something that I just come across while I was doing my research, was the spike in deaths in jails and prisons in Michigan. In 2018, there was a huge spike of reported deaths in prisons all across the state of Michigan. There was a total of 185 deaths for the year, which Michigan has not seen those numbers since 2009. So taking that into account, it's pretty, suspicious or concerning, I would say, when the actual prison population has dropped 7,000 inmates since then. There was a quote that said, Lois Pulano, the founder of MDOC's Family Advisory Board, was more concerned that the deaths might be due to poor medical and mental health care within the prison system. So I definitely think that mental health needs to be taken more seriously in our prison systems, and I think that the prisoners deserve and need more resources to help themselves to work through their problems and at the end of the day come to a resolution. I hope you enjoyed my presentation on the relation between suicide and mental health within our prisons. And I am going to be attaching a copy of my PowerPoint to you so you can see exactly where I was reading all my information from, as well as a source page as well. So it has been a great semester with you as an instructor. You've been absolutely great. I really appreciate you working with me, and I will hopefully talk to you soon. Thank you.